On Christmas Eve 2023, I found my 17-year-old daughter Madison sitting alone in our dark kitchen at 11:30 p.m., crying over a piece of cold pizza. She was supposed to be celebrating with my family at their annual Christmas Eve dinner in Denver, Colorado, the one tradition they'd maintained for over 20 years. Instead, she was home, humiliated, after my own mother told her there wasn't enough food for her at the table. What happened next would expose a family betrayal so devastating that it would end 38 years of relationship in a single letter. But the betrayal wasn't just what they did to Madison that night. It was what I discovered they'd been planning all along. My name is Dr. Jessica Reynolds, and this is the story of how I learned that the family I'd been financially supporting for over a decade had been systematically plotting to destroy my relationship with my daughter, and how one Christmas dinner became the final battle in a war I didn't even know was being fought. I'd just finished a brutal 18-hour shift in the trauma unit at Denver General Hospital. December 24th is always chaos in the ER, heart attacks from family stress, accidents from holiday travel, and the inevitable overdoses from people who couldn't handle another family gathering. I was exhausted, covered in coffee stains, and looking forward to collapsing into bed knowing that Madison was safe and happy with her grandparents. But when I walked through our front door in Aurora, I found her curled up on our kitchen island, still wearing the red dress she'd carefully chosen for dinner, mascara streaked down her cheeks. "Madison, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be at Grandma's." She looked up at me with that expression teenagers get when they're trying not to cry but losing the battle. "They said there wasn't enough food." I stood there, car keys still in my hand, trying to process what she'd said. "What do you mean there wasn't enough food?" Grandma opened the door and looked at me like I was unwelcome. She said they'd miscounted, and there wasn't a plate prepared for me. She suggested I grabbed something on the way home. My heart started pounding, but not from exhaustion anymore. "Madison, you are SVPD 2 weeks ago. Grandma confirmed you were coming." "I know, but she said Cousin Emma brought her new boyfriend, and Aunt Claire brought her stepchildren, and suddenly there were too many people." She acted like I was being unreasonable for showing up. I set my purse down slowly, trying to stay calm. "Did anyone offer to share their food? Did anyone suggest we figure it out?" Madison shook her head. "Uncle Rick was there with his whole family. Aunt Claire had brought 3 extra people I'd never met. But when Grandma realized I was there, she pulled me aside and whispered that it would be less awkward if I just left." "Less awkward for who?" "She said the adults needed to discuss some family business anyway, and it wasn't really appropriate for someone my age." That's when I noticed the pizza box on the counter. "Is that what you had for Christmas dinner?" She nodded, fresh tears starting. "I was so embarrassed, Mom. I sat in the car for 20 minutes trying not to cry. Then I drove through the McDonald's on Colfax, but it was closed. This was all I could find open." I looked at my daughter, my brilliant, kind, 17-year-old daughter, who'd been excited for weeks about Christmas dinner, who'd spent her own money on gifts for everyone, who'd driven 40 minutes through holiday traffic to be with family, eating gas station pizza alone on Christmas Eve. "Madison, I need you to tell me exactly what Grandma said when you arrived." She took a shaky breath. I knocked on the door, and she answered with this weird fake smile. She said, "Oh, Madison, what are you doing here?" Like it was a surprise. When I reminded her about Christmas dinner, she got this look on her face and said, "Well, this is awkward. We weren't expecting you, but you had confirmed." "I know. I even asked if I could bring anything. She told me not to worry about it. But tonight, she acted like I'd crashed the party uninvited." "What about Grandpa? What did he say?" Madison's face crumpled. "He was in his chair watching TV. He barely looked at me. When Grandma said there wasn't room, he just shrugged and said, 'That's too bad, kiddo. Maybe next year.'" I felt something cold settle in my chest. And Aunt Claire, Uncle Rick, they all just watched, like it was awkward but not their problem. Aunt Claire actually said, "Well, we did bring extra people." Like that explained everything. I stared at my daughter, this beautiful young woman who'd been reduced to tears by people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. But what made my blood turn to ice was the realization that this wasn't spontaneous cruelty. This was planned. "Madison, did you get the feeling they'd discussed this before you arrived?" She nodded slowly. "When I was leaving, I heard Uncle Rick say, 'Well, that went better than expected,' like they'd been worried about something. That's when I knew this wasn't about too many people or not enough food. This was about sending me a message through my daughter, and I was about to send one back. If you're already sensing that this Christmas story is going to get dark, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. What I discovered about my family's true motives will shock you to your core. And drop a comment if you've ever had family members who seemed to enjoy hurting the people you love most. The next morning, Christmas Day, I did something I'd never done before. I called in every favor I had at the hospital and got someone to cover my shift. Then I sat down at my computer and started writing a letter that would change everything. But before I tell you what that letter said, you need to understand the history that led to that moment. Because what happened to Madison on Christmas Eve wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a decades-long pattern that I'd been too blind, or too hopeful, to recognize. You see, my family had never forgiven me for becoming a doctor, and they'd been planning their revenge for years. Growing up in a working-class family in Colorado Springs, I learned early that intelligence was suspicious and ambition was selfish. My parents, Robert and Linda Reynolds, had both dropped out of high school. My father worked construction when his back allowed it, and my mother cleaned houses for wealthy families on the north side of town. They had simple dreams, steady paychecks, Friday night beers, and children who knew their place in the world. I was not that child. From the age of 5, I was asking questions that made adults uncomfortable. Why do people get sick? How do medicines work? Why can't we fix Grandpa's heart? While other kids were playing with dolls, I was dissecting flowers to see how they worked inside. My younger sister Claire, on the other hand, was everything my parents wanted. Pretty, social, content with average grades and modest goals. She wanted to get married young, have babies, and live in the same neighborhood where we grew up. She never challenged anyone, never made anyone feel inferior by comparison. She was the golden child. I was the problem. Jessica thinks she's better than us, became my mother's favorite complaint. Any achievement, honor roll, science fair, wins. Scholarship applications was met with eye rolls and comments about how I was showing off or making everyone else look bad. When I announced I wanted to be a doctor, my father laughed. Doctors come from doctor families, Jess. People like us become nurses if we're lucky. But I was determined. I worked 3 jobs through high school, saved every penny, and earned a full scholarship to the University of Colorado. The day I got my acceptance letter, my parents' reaction was ice-cold silence, while my mother finally said, "I hope you remember where you came from when you're too good for the rest of us." Medical school was 8 years of 18-hour days, crushing debt despite scholarships, and almost no contact with my family. They never visited, never called to check how I was doing, never acknowledged my graduation. When I finished my residency and got my first position at Denver General, my mother's only comment was, "Must be nice to have all that money." I tried to bridge the gap. I sent flowers on birthdays, expensive gifts at Christmas, always offered to pay for family dinners when I visited. But there was always an undercurrent of resentment, a sense that my success was somehow a betrayal of family loyalty. Things changed when I met David, a nurse practitioner at the hospital. We fell in love, overshared late-night shifts, and a mutual understanding of what it meant to choose healing as a career. When we got married, my family attended but spent the entire reception making comments about how fancy everything was. When Madison was born, I thought having a grandchild might soften their hearts, and it did, for a while. My parents adored her as a baby and toddler. But as she grew older and started showing the same intellectual curiosity that had marked me as different, I noticed the change. "She's getting too smart for her own good," my mother would say when Madison asked sophisticated questions. "You better watch out or she'll end up thinking she's better than her family too." By the time Madison was in middle school, the pattern was clear. My parents would praise Claire's children for average accomplishments while dismissing Madison's exceptional ones. When Madison won the state science fair in 8th grade, my mother said, "Well, that's nice, but Emma got picked for the cheerleading squad. That takes real talent." I started noticing other things too. Family gatherings where Madison was subtly excluded from conversations, Christmas gifts that were clearly less thoughtful than what her cousins received, comments about how she was becoming too serious or losing her sense of fun. But I told myself I was being oversensitive. These were small slights, easily explained by generational differences or misunderstandings. I focused on building Madison's confidence at home and tried to minimize the family drama. What I didn't realize was that my parents and Claire had been having conversations about me and Madison for years, conversations that would eventually lead to that Christmas Eve betrayal. The first hint came 6 months before Christmas. During a family barbecue at my parents' house, I was in the kitchen helping my mother prepare side dishes when I overheard her talking to Claire on the back porch. "She acts like she's doing us such a favor," my mother was saying, "bringing her perfect daughter around, like we should be grateful for the privilege Madison is getting, just like Jessica," Claire replied. "All superior and know-it-all. She corrected Emma's math homework last time they were together. Made Emma feel stupid. Maybe it's time we taught them both a lesson about family loyalty." I dismissed it as idle complaining. Every family has tensions, right? But looking back, that was the moment they started planning. Over the next 6 months, I noticed subtle changes in how they treated Madison. Invitations that came late or were unclear about timing, plans that mysteriously changed after we'd already committed, conversations that stopped when Madison entered the room. But the most insidious part was how they began undermining my parenting behind my back. I discovered this completely by accident 3 weeks before Christmas. Madison came home from spending the day with her cousins looking unusually quiet. "How was your time with Emma and the family?" I asked. "It was fine," she said, but her tone suggested otherwise. "Madison, what's wrong?" She hesitated, then said, "Mom, do you think I'm spoiled?" My heart sank. "What do you mean?" Aunt Claire said I was lucky to have a mom who could afford to buy me everything I wanted, but that it was making me entitled. She said I should appreciate how hard regular families have to work for things. "Madison, did something specific happen today?" Emma was complaining about having to get a job to save money for college, and I mentioned that you'd been setting aside money for my education since I was little. Aunt Claire got this weird look and said, "Well, not everyone can afford to throw money around like your mother." I felt a familiar anger building. "Madison, what you heard today says nothing about you and everything about Aunt Claire's insecurities." "But Mom, maybe she's right. Maybe I don't appreciate how lucky I am." That's when I realized what they were doing. They weren't just excluding Madison from family activities. They were actively trying to make her feel guilty for the life I'd worked so hard to provide for her. They were weaponizing her natural empathy against both of us. But I still didn't understand the full scope of their plan until Christmas Eve, when they played their final card. What I didn't know was that the too many people excuse was a lie. What I didn't know was that they'd planned Madison's rejection weeks in advance. And what I definitely didn't know was that this was just the opening move in a larger game. What my family had been counting on, what they'd built their entire strategy around, was the fact that I'd been financially supporting them for over 8 years. They thought my guilt and sense of obligation would make me overlook their treatment of Madison, just like I'd overlooked their treatment of me for decades. They had no idea that the Christmas Eve incident would be the catalyst that made me examine every dollar I'd given them, every favor I'd done, every sacrifice I'd made for people who saw my generosity as weakness. The financial support had started innocently enough. 3 years into my first attending position at Denver General, I was finally making real money for the first time in my life. When my father injured his back and couldn't work for 6 months, I stepped in to help with their mortgage payments. When my mother needed dental work that their insurance wouldn't cover, I paid for it without hesitation. "Family takes care of family," my mother would say whenever I sent money. It became her favorite phrase, usually deployed right before asking for another favor. Over the years, the requests became more frequent and more substantial. Car repairs that always seemed to cost exactly what I could afford. Medical bills that needed to be paid immediately. Emergencies that required cash transfers within hours. I never questioned it. I was grateful to be in a position to help, and I genuinely wanted my parents to have a comfortable retirement. When they mentioned they were worried about losing their house, I didn't hesitate to take over the mortgage payments entirely. "It's just temporary," my father assured me, "until we get back on our feet." That was 5 years ago. The mortgage payments had never stopped. Neither had the other requests. Claire's husband lost his job and needed help with rent. My uncle needed money for a new roof. My cousin's daughter needed funds for college. Every family crisis somehow became my financial responsibility. By 2023, I was sending my parents $3,200 a month in mortgage payments, plus covering their car insurance, health insurance, supplements, and utility bills. I'd purchased them a new refrigerator, a new washer and dryer, and paid for home repairs that totaled nearly $15 in 8 years. I'd given my family over $180,000. But here's what I didn't realize until that Christmas morning. As I sat reviewing my bank statements, they weren't just taking my money, they were resenting me for having it. The evidence was hiding in plain sight. Social media posts about expensive family dinners I wasn't invited to. Photos of vacations they claimed they couldn't afford, taken just weeks after I'd sent emergency money. New purchases that appeared in their home right after I'd paid their bills. My mother had been buying designer handbags while I paid her mortgage. My father had purchased a motorcycle while I covered his insurance. Claire had renovated her kitchen while I sent money to help with her struggling finances. They weren't poor. They were redistributing my wealth while simultaneously punishing me for having it. But the most painful discovery came when I found my mother's Facebook messages, accidentally left open on her laptop during a visit the week before Christmas. I'd gone to help her set up a new printer, and while waiting for software to install, a message notification popped up. It was a conversation with Claire from 3 months earlier. "Linda, Jessica sent another $2,000 for the roof repair. I swear she thinks money solves everything. Claire, at least she's useful for something. Did you tell her we got estimates from other contractors?" Linda, "Hell no. She doesn't need to know we could have done it for $800. She wants to throw money around. Let her." Claire, "I still think we should teach her a lesson about taking family for granted." Linda, "Oh, we will. Christmas is coming up. Perfect timing." Claire, "What are you thinking?" Linda, "That precious daughter of hers needs to learn that money doesn't buy you a place at the family table. Maybe if Madison gets her feelings hurt enough, Jessica will finally understand what really matters." Claire, "You want to exclude Madison from Christmas dinner?" Linda, "I want to show Jessica that all her money and education doesn't make her special. She's been acting like she's doing us favors for years. Time to remind her that family loyalty goes both ways." Claire, "What if she stops sending money?" Linda, "She won't. She's too guilty about abandoning us for her fancy career. Besides, where else is she going to find family?" I stared at that conversation for 20 minutes, reading it over and over, trying to process the level of calculation behind what I'd thought were spontaneous family dynamics. They'd been planning to hurt Madison for months, not because they were overwhelmed or unprepared, but because they wanted to punish me for being successful. They'd deliberately set up a situation designed to humiliate my daughter, confident that I would apologize, send more money, and accept my place as the family ATM, who was grateful for any scraps of acceptance they threw my way. They'd underestimated me completely. That Christmas morning, after Madison had finally gone to bed, I spent 4 hours documenting every financial transaction I'd made for my family over the past 8 years, every mortgage payment, every emergency fund transfer, every gift that was really a bailout disguised as generosity. The total was staggering: $247,000, a quarter of $1,000,000 given to people who saw my success as a personal insult and my daughter as collateral damage in their campaign to cut me down to size. But what enraged me most wasn't the money, it was the realization that they'd been playing a long game designed to keep me grateful, guilty, and compliant while they took everything I offered and gave nothing back but contempt. They thought they had me trapped. They thought I needed their approval more than they needed my money. They thought wrong. That morning, I wrote 2 letters, one to my parents and one to my bank. The first letter would end our relationship forever. The second would end their access to my generosity. By noon, on Christmas Day, I'd fired the first shot in a war they'd started but hadn't expected me to finish. The letter I delivered to my parents' door on Christmas morning was 3 pages long and 8 years in the making. I'd written it in a single sitting, fueled by coffee and the kind of clarity that comes when you finally see the truth about people. You've been making excuses for your entire life, but before I tell you what that letter said, I need to explain what happened in the hours after I discovered those Facebook messages, because the letter wasn't just an emotional response. It was a strategic declaration of war from someone who'd finally realized she was already under attack. After documenting the financial trail, I'd called my lawyer's emergency line. Patricia Hoffman had handled my estate planning and business contracts for years, but she'd never heard me sound like I did that morning. "Patricia, I need to know about tenant rights and financial obligations. Specifically, what happens when someone has been living in your property without a lease for 5 years. Jessica, it's Christmas morning. Are you all right? I'm about to evict my parents from the house I've been paying for, and I need to know the legal process. There was a pause. Can this wait until no? It can't. They've been living in a house I own, using utilities I pay for, driving cars I insure, while planning to emotionally destroy my daughter. I want them gone, and I want to know the fastest legal way to make that happen. Patricia walked me through Colorado's eviction procedures. As the property owner, I could issue a 30-day notice to quit for month-to-month tenants, which is what my parents had become by default since they'd never signed a lease. The process was straightforward but would take time. Jessica, are you sure you want to do this? Family evictions can get very ugly. Patricia, they turned away my 17-year-old daughter on Christmas Eve after I've spent 8 years paying their bills. It's already ugly. In that case, I'll prepare the documentation. But Jessica, you should be prepared for this to get worse before it gets better. She was right. But what she couldn't have predicted was how much worse, or how quickly it would escalate. The letter I hand-delivered that morning was both simpler and more devastating than any legal document. December 25th, 2023, Robert and Linda Reynolds. Last night, you turned away my daughter from Christmas dinner, claiming there wasn't room at a table that seated 28 people. You told her she wasn't expected, despite her RSVP, 2 weeks prior. You humiliated a 17-year-old girl who had driven 40 miles to be with family, bringing gifts she'd bought with her own money. This wasn't a mistake or miscommunication. I've seen the Facebook messages discussing your plan to teach Jessica a lesson by hurting Madison. You deliberately orchestrated her rejection to punish me for being successful. For 8 years, I have supported this family financially. I have paid your mortgage $3,200 a month, your insurance premiums $847 a month, your utility bills $400 a month, and covered every emergency you've claimed to have. The total amount is $247,000. I did this because I thought we were family. I was wrong. Family doesn't weaponize children to settle adult grievances. Family doesn't take financial support while plotting emotional sabotage, effective immediately. All financial support ends today. You have 30 days to vacate the property. At 1247 Maple Drive, all utilities will be disconnected January 15th. You are no longer welcome in my home or my daughter's life. You said there wasn't room for Madison at your table. There's no room in our lives for people who would hurt a child to make a point. Don't contact me again. Dr. Jessica Reynolds. I drove to their house at 7 a.m. on Christmas morning, knowing they'd be home and likely hungover from their celebration the night before. I taped the letter to their front door, took a photo for documentation, and left. My phone started ringing before I reached the end of their street. I didn't answer. By the time I got home, there were 6 missed calls and 12 text messages. I read them while Madison was still asleep, marveling at how quickly my parents' tune changed when money was on the line. 7:23 a.m. Mom, we need to talk about this ridiculous letter. 7:25 a.m. Dad, you're overreacting to a simple misunderstanding. 7:31 a.m. Mom, Madison is welcome anytime. You know that. 7:33 a.m. Mom, you can't just throw us out of our home. 7:35 a.m. Dad, think about what you're doing to your family. 7:42 a.m. Claire, Mom told me what you did. This is insane. 7:44 a.m. Mom, we raised you better than this. 7:47 a.m. Dad, call us immediately. 7:52 a.m. Mom, you're destroying this family over nothing. 8:05 a.m. Claire, Madison probably misunderstood what happened. 8:18 a.m. Mom, if you don't call back in 1 hour, we're coming over. 8:43 a.m. Dad, you've lost your mind. I saved every message, then blocked all their numbers, but they didn't give up. At 11 a.m. Someone started pounding on my front door. Through the peephole, I could see my mother, still in her Christmas robe, clutching the letter and looking absolutely furious. I didn't open the door. She pounded harder. Jessica, open this door right now. Madison appeared at the top of the stairs, looking confused and alarmed. Mom, what's happening? Your grandmother is having a tantrum, I said calmly. Go back to your room. The pounding continued for another 5 minutes, accompanied by shouting about ungrateful daughters and destroyed families. Finally, I heard car doors slam and the sound of their departure. 20 minutes later, Claire arrived, then my Uncle Rick, then 2 cousins I barely spoke to. Each one demanded I opened the door and discuss this like adults. Each one was told through the intercom that there was nothing to discuss. Each one left angrier than they'd arrived by evening. My phone, on a new number I'd activated that afternoon, had received calls from 17 different family members. Word was spreading through the Reynolds clan, and the narrative was clear. Jessica had lost her mind and was destroying the family over a simple misunderstanding. But what they didn't know was that I'd spent the afternoon making other calls to my mortgage company, transferring the property deed entirely into my name and removing my parents as authorized residents, to the utility companies, setting disconnect dates for all services, to my insurance company, removing my parents' cars from my policy effective immediately. By Christmas night, I'd systematically dismantled 8 years of financial entanglement. In a single day, Madison found me in my home office at 9 p.m., surrounded by paperwork and legal documents. "Mom, are you really kicking Grandma and Grandpa out of their house?" I looked at my daughter, this brave, brilliant young woman who'd spent Christmas Eve crying over gas station pizza because her own grandparents had rejected her to make a point. "Madison, it's not their house, it's mine. I've been paying for it for 5 years while they saved their money for vacations and motorcycle purchases. And yes, I'm kicking them out. Because of what happened to me. Because of who they are. What happened to you just made me finally see it clearly." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry this is happening because of me. Madison, this isn't happening because of you. This is happening because I finally stopped accepting cruelty disguised as family loyalty." That night, I slept better than I had in years. For the first time since medical school, I wasn't worried about who would call with their next financial emergency or family crisis that somehow required my checkbook to solve, but I should have known the war was just beginning. The first week of January brought an escalation I hadn't anticipated. My family didn't just want their money back, they wanted to destroy my reputation, my career, and my relationship with Madison in the process. It started with the calls to my hospital. On January 3rd, my department supervisor, Dr. Martinez, asked me to stay after our morning briefing. "Jessica, I received some concerning calls over the holiday break. Family members claiming you're having some kind of mental health crisis. They're worried about your judgment and decision-making abilities." I felt my stomach drop. "What exactly did they say?" "That you've become unstable, paranoid, making irrational financial decisions. One caller suggested that maybe you shouldn't be treating patients until you've sought professional help for your emotional breakdown." The audacity was breathtaking. My parents, people who'd never held a job requiring more than a high school education, were questioning my mental fitness to practice medicine. "Dr. Martinez, I'm going through a family separation due to their mistreatment of my daughter. There's nothing wrong with my mental health or professional capabilities." I figured as much. "But Jessica, they're persistent. I've gotten 6 calls in 3 days. Someone even contacted the medical board." My blood went cold. The medical board? A complaint about potential substance abuse and erratic behavior. It's clearly spurious, but it will require a response. I spent that evening documenting everything. The Facebook messages, the financial records, the timeline of events. Patricia helped me prepare a response that was both professional and devastating, including evidence of my family's 8-year financial dependency and their documented plan to emotionally manipulate my daughter. But the professional attacks were just the beginning. The real retaliation targeted Madison directly. On January 5th, Madison came home from school looking confused and upset. "Mom, Emma texted me. She said Aunt Claire told her I was lying about Christmas Eve, that I made up the whole story about being turned away." "What exactly did Emma say?" Madison pulled out her phone. She said, "My mom told me you're a spoiled brat who's trying to ruin the family because you didn't get enough attention at Christmas. She said you convinced your mom to kick Grandma and Grandpa out of their house over nothing." I read the text chain, watching my family's narrative unfold in real time. According to their version, Madison was an entitled teenager who'd thrown a tantrum when she wasn't the center of attention. I was an unstable doctor having a midlife crisis, destroying the family because I couldn't handle normal holiday stress. "Madison, do you believe what Emma is saying?" "No. But Mom, what if other people do?" That's when I realized their strategy wasn't just about getting their house back. They were trying to isolate Madison and me from anyone who might support us, while simultaneously building a case that I was an unfit parent having a psychological breakdown. The next attack came through Madison's school. On January 8th, I received A call from Madison's guidance counselor. Dr. Reynolds, we've received some concerning reports about Madison's home situation. A family member contacted us expressing worry about her well-being during what they described as a family crisis involving financial abuse and emotional instability. Financial abuse? By whom? They suggested that you might be withholding financial support from elderly family members as a form of psychological manipulation, and that this stress might be affecting Madison's emotional state. I was speechless. They'd turned my decision to stop enabling their lifestyle into evidence of elder abuse. Mrs. Peterson, I'd like to meet with you tomorrow to discuss the actual situation. Of course, Dr. Reynolds, I should mention that the caller also suggested Madison might benefit from counseling to help her process what they called traumatic family dysfunction. That evening, I found Madison doing homework at the kitchen table, but her usual focus was absent. Madison, how are you handling all of this family drama? I'm okay. But Mom, kids at school are asking questions. Someone's cousin posted on social media about how you abandoned Grandma and Grandpa. They're making it sound like you're this cold, money-obsessed person who threw her parents out for no reason. Do you believe that's who I am? No, but it's hard when everyone's talking about it. That night, I realized my family's strategy was working exactly as intended. They were systematically undermining my credibility as a professional and a parent, while positioning themselves as the victims of my mental instability. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They'd underestimated how thoroughly I'd documented their behavior, and they'd overestimated how much tolerance the world has for people who emotionally abuse teenagers. On January 10th, I went on the offensive. I started with the school meeting, bringing printed copies of the Facebook messages that revealed their premeditated plan to humiliate Madison. Mrs. Peterson read them with growing shock. Dr. Reynolds, this completely changes the context of their concerns. Mrs. Peterson, my family spent months planning to emotionally hurt my daughter to punish me for being successful. When I protected her by cutting off their financial support, they retaliated by trying to damage my professional reputation and suggesting my daughter needs therapy for being traumatized by their cruelty. What can we do to support Madison during this time? You can recognize that the real family dysfunction comes from adults who would weaponize a child to settle their grievances, not from a parent who chooses to protect her child from emotional abuse. Next, I contacted the medical board directly, submitting a comprehensive packet that included financial records, the Facebook messages, and a timeline showing how my family's spurious complaints had escalated immediately after their financial support was terminated. The response was swift and decisive. The complaint was dismissed as retaliatory and without merit, but my most effective response was the simplest thought. I started telling the truth. When colleagues asked about the family situation, I didn't hedge or minimize. I explained exactly what my parents had done to Madison and why I'd chosen to prioritize my daughter's well-being over family loyalty. When other parents at Madison's school heard the story, the response was overwhelmingly supportive. No parent could imagine turning away a teenager on Christmas Eve, regardless of adult family dynamics. When friends heard about the financial manipulation and calculated cruelty, they weren't shocked by my decision to cut contact. They were shocked that I'd tolerated it for so long. But the moment I knew I'd won came when my Uncle Rick, my father's brother, and the family patriarch, called me directly. Jessica, I need to apologize. I was so surprised I almost dropped the phone. Uncle Rick, your mother showed me those Facebook messages you submitted to the school. I had no idea they'd planned what happened to Madison. That's not family behavior, Jessica. That's cruelty. Thank you for saying that. I've talked to the rest of the family, the cousins, your Aunt Mary, even some of Claire's friends who were there that night. Everyone's disgusted by what your parents did. Claire's trying to defend them, but even her own husband thinks they went too far. What are you telling me, Uncle Rick? I'm telling you that the family support your parents were counting on, it's evaporating. People don't like adults who hurt kids to make points, and people really don't like finding out they've been lied to about the reasons behind family drama. What do you mean, lied to? Your parents told everyone you'd cut them off because you were having money problems and couldn't afford to help anymore. They never mentioned the plan to humiliate Madison. When that came out, it changed everything. That conversation marked the turning point. My parents had built their retaliation strategy on the assumption that the family would rally around them, as the victims of their ungrateful daughter's abandonment. Instead, the truth about their calculated cruelty had isolated them from the very people they'd expected to rescue them. By late January, they'd stopped trying to get other family members to pressure me. The professional complaints had ceased. The social media campaign had backfired spectacularly when multiple people shared stories of their own negative experiences with my parents' manipulative behavior. But they had one last card to play, and it was the most desperate move yet. On February 1st, they showed up at Madison's school. The call came at 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was reviewing patient charts when my phone rang with Madison's school number. Dr. Reynolds, this is Principal Harrison. We have a situation. Madison's grandparents are here demanding to speak with her, claiming there's a family emergency. Madison doesn't want to see them, but they're refusing to leave. I was in my car within 5 minutes. When I arrived at Denver East High School, I found my parents sitting in the main office, both looking older and more desperate than I'd ever seen them. My mother was clutching a tissue, my father staring at the floor with the defeated posture of someone who'd run out of options. Madison was in the counselor's office, visible through the glass partition, looking anxious but determined. "What are you doing here?" I asked my parents directly. My mother looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "We're trying to see our granddaughter." "We have a right, you have no rights here." I cut her off. "This is Madison's school, and she doesn't want to see you." "Jessica, please," my father said quietly. "We just want to talk to her, to explain." "Explain what?" "How you spent months planning to humiliate her. How you've spent the last month trying to destroy my career and reputation because I chose to protect her." Principal Harrison stepped forward. "Dr. Reynolds, your parents claim there's been a misunderstanding about family finances that's affecting Madison's stability. They're requesting a meeting to clear the air." I looked at my parents. These people who'd raised me, supported me in their own limited way, and ultimately revealed themselves to be capable of calculated cruelty against a child. "There's no misunderstanding," I said, "and there's no meeting. You're not welcome in my daughter's life." My mother stood up, desperation making her voice shrill. "She's our granddaughter. You can't just cut us off forever." "I can, and I will, just like you cut her off on Christmas Eve." "That was different." "No, it wasn't. You made a choice to prioritize hurting me over loving her. These are the consequences." My father finally looked up. "Jessica, we made a mistake. We were angry, and we handled it wrong. But cutting off your whole family, that's not proportional." "Dad, you didn't make a mistake. You made a plan. For months, you calculated exactly how to hurt a 17-year-old girl to punish her mother for being successful. That's not a mistake. That's who you are." The silence that followed was broken by Madison opening the counselor's office door. "Mom, are you okay?" I turned to my daughter, this young woman who'd shown more grace and maturity in the past month than her grandparents had shown in decades. "I'm fine, honey. Your grandparents were just leaving." Madison looked at her grandparents, and for a moment, I saw the child she'd been. The little girl who'd loved them unconditionally, who'd spent weekends at their house, who'd believed family meant safety and acceptance. "Madison," my mother said, her voice breaking, "we love you. We never meant to hurt you." Madison was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "If you loved me, you wouldn't have planned to hurt me to get back at my mom." My mother flinched like she'd been slapped. "Grandma, I saw the Facebook messages. I know this wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. You wanted to make me feel unwanted because you were angry at Mom for being successful. That's not. It is though. And the worst part is that you let me think I did something wrong. I spent weeks wondering if I was spoiled or entitled or if I'd somehow deserved to be turned away. You let me believe that, even when you knew the truth." My father tried to speak. "Madison, Grandpa, you've had 6 weeks to apologize to me directly. Instead, you've been trying to make Mom look crazy and get her in trouble at work. That's not love, that's revenge." The silence stretched until my mother started crying again. "We lost everything," she whispered. "The house, the support, our whole family. We don't know what to do." "You lost the money," Madison corrected quietly. "You lost the family when you decided I wasn't worth a place at your table." That was the moment my parents finally understood what they'd actually sacrificed for their moment of petty revenge. They left without another word. That evening, Madison and I sat on our couch eating takeout Chinese food and watching terrible Netflix comedies. It was the most relaxed either of us had felt in months. "Mom, do you think they'll ever understand what they did wrong?" "I don't know, honey, but it doesn't matter anymore. Our job isn't to teach them how to be better people. Our job is to protect ourselves from people who choose to be cruel. Do you miss them? I thought about it honestly. I miss the idea of them. I miss believing I had parents who loved me unconditionally. But the actual people they turned out to be, no, I don't miss them at all. Me neither. Is that terrible? No, sweetheart. That's healthy. 6 months later, I heard through Uncle Rick that my parents had moved to a smaller town outside Colorado Springs, living in a trailer park and working part-time jobs to make ends meet. Claire had stopped speaking to them after they'd tried to manipulate her children the same way they'd manipulated Madison. The house I'd been paying for was sold to a young family with 3 kids. I used the proceeds to start a college fund for Madison and to take the first real vacation I'd had in years. Madison thrived without the constant undercurrent of family drama. Her grades improved, her confidence soared, and she started talking about her future with excitement instead of anxiety. As for me, I learned that choosing peace over family loyalty isn't selfish, it's survival. I learned that people who demand your gratitude for their cruelty don't deserve your presence in their lives. And I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is remove toxic people from your child's world, even when those people are family. 2 years later, Madison is a freshman at the University of Colorado, studying biomedical engineering. She's brilliant, confident, and surrounded by friends who appreciate her intelligence instead of resenting it. We spend holidays together now, just the 2 of us or with friends who choose to be family. Our Christmas dinners include everyone who wants to be there, and nobody gets turned away for being too smart, too successful, or too different. My parents have never contacted us again. Sometimes I wonder if they ever understood that their moment of petty revenge cost them a relationship with their granddaughter that could have lasted a lifetime. But mostly, I don't think about them at all. The hardest part of this entire experience wasn't cutting off my parents financially or even dealing with their retaliation. It was accepting that the people who raised me were capable of deliberately hurting my child to settle their adult grievances. For 38 years, I'd made excuses for their resentment of my success. I'd told myself that their criticism came from insecurity, that their coldness was just their way. I'd convinced myself that loving them meant accepting their limitations and working around their flaws. But there's a difference between accepting someone's limitations and enabling their cruelty. When they turned Madison away on Christmas Eve, they crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. They revealed that their resentment of me was stronger than their love for her. They showed me that they'd rather hurt an innocent child than deal with their own feelings of inadequacy. That wasn't a moment of poor judgment or family dysfunction. That was a choice. A calculated, premeditated choice to inflict emotional pain on someone who'd never done anything to deserve it. The most insidious part of family abuse is how it conditions you to normalize the unacceptable. For decades, I'd been trained to absorb their resentment, fund their lifestyle, and be grateful for whatever scraps of affection they offered in return. I'd been so focused on being a good daughter that I'd forgotten my primary job was being a good mother. Cutting them off wasn't about money or houses or who was right or wrong in family arguments. It was about refusing to sacrifice my daughter's emotional well-being to maintain relationships with people who saw her as collateral damage in their war against my success. Recovery meant learning to trust my own perceptions instead of constantly second-guessing whether I was being too sensitive or overreacting. It meant recognizing that healthy families don't require you to choose between protecting your child and maintaining family peace. Most importantly, it meant teaching Madison that love doesn't come with conditions. Acceptance doesn't require diminishing yourself, and family should be a source of safety, not a battlefield where children become weapons. The question that haunts me isn't whether I made the right choice. I know I did. It's how many other families are operating under similar dynamics right now, with children learning that their worth is negotiable, and parents learning that peace is more important than protection. How many successful people are funding their own emotional abuse because they've been taught that family loyalty means accepting unacceptable behavior? How many children are being used as pawns in adult power struggles disguised as family traditions? So here's my question for you. Is there someone in your life who demands your loyalty but offers only conditional love in return? Someone who punishes your success, resents your happiness, or uses the people you love most as leverage against you? What would happen if you stopped trying to earn their approval and started protecting the people who actually deserve your love? If this story resonated with you, Please subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. Share your own experiences with toxic family dynamics in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our stories helps others realize they're not alone in facing these impossible choices. Remember, choosing your child's well-being over family loyalty isn't betrayal. Sometimes it's the most loving thing you can do. And thank you for listening to the hardest story I've ever had to tell.